All right, so we're talking about the duels at Daytona. Now I'm recording this like right before the Clash. So if news breaks between the Clash and the Super Bowl, I apologize for not having that in the video. But we play daily fantasy sports. I don't play season-long NASCAR. I don't make videos for season-long NASCAR. I don't make videos for like week-long NASCAR. We focus race by race, slate by slate, okay? So if any news comes out, of course, I'll talk about it in the live shows, and it'll be built into the projections. It's not the end-all, be-all for the duels right now. Now, secondly, I want to show you stuff, and yet again, this is why I would like you to join us. Join us on the Patreon. Support Pearce and I. I understand you might look and see that $6 price tag and be like, whoa, dude, you're out of your mind. That is way too expensive. Okay, but let me sell you on that real fast, okay? It's him and I, okay? I do this full time, okay? If you need questions answered, if you need one-on-one talks, if you need anything, I'm here. This is what I do, okay? We're not at a big site. We're not having to distribute this fee amongst like all the writers and all the editors and to keep the site up. We're not doing that. Your money goes directly to me and Pearce, okay? You're supporting us. Thank you very much. We also make things in a very simple, easy, clear, concise way to look at. We'll give you a lot of information in a very easy way. For example, now, one thing that I want to do less of this year is showing the sheets and showing the stuff. But look, this is the duel. We do this once a year. But this is a fantastic example of how we present stuff and how I think it's very easy for you to understand things from us. And I understand somebody's probably going to take this and put it in their own sheet and still make it look ugly and everything. And I've seen the other sheets out there. They're very ugly. Now, what are you looking at on screen? Brandon, we got a lot on here. You got to explain it. Well, here, I'm going to explain it for you. So on your right, you see the starting grids for duel number 1 up here and the starting grids for duel number 2. You find the finishing positions for these drivers and for this race right here. Okay, why do we have 2 columns here, Brandon? Well, let me get to that. This is the DFS ranking in terms of where they scored in terms of DraftKings points, okay? Why do I think it's important to have this stuff on the screen and understand this stuff from multiple different aspects in terms of where they finish, where not necessarily where positions are gonna finish and stuff, but what are the Larry Mack trends of the race? Where does the pole sitter go? Where does the outside pole sitter go? Okay, let me go over some caveats real fast that I'm sure some of you people are going to want me to cover. So in the dual races, if you score the pole for the Daytona 500, or if you're on the outside pole for the 500 on qualifying on Wednesday, then you're going to be starting first and second as long as you don't destroy that car. It doesn't matter where you finish in the duel. Now, if you're a go or go homer, which shout out to the charter system for really making this year look absolutely horribly stupid. I pray that Jimmy Johnson misses the race, and I hope that Travis Pastrana makes it. But let's just say, for example, of the open cars, let's say we end up having 3 in each race. Okay, the fastest open car, or the fastest open car of the one in the duel is also going to be locked in as long as they don't destroy the field. And so when we look at, in terms of open cars, how these guys are going to be racing and stuff, like if you have Chandler Smith, Travis Pastrana, and Jimmy Johnson in the same duel, and Travis Pastrana, for whatever reason, has the fastest car out of those 3 from qualifying, well, he's going to make it into the race, and so it would just fall into Chandler Smith and Jimmy Johnson racing for each other. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because, yes, the go-go homers is a huge aspect of the duels, but in terms of DFS, they're not really a priority for really any reason, okay? If you want to think of multi-class racing, if you want to think of like Le Mans style racing, it really is 2 races in this one individual race, 2 different classes. You have the main guys, the charter teams who are just racing, to figure out where they're going to finish and figure out everything else. Then you have the go-go homers that are just racing by themselves, okay? Like when you look back at last year's event, you basically had the MBM crew racing against, Kaz Grala and the money team. Like, these guys were so off the pace, and they were making so many mistakes. They were just racing with each other. They weren't racing against anyone else. Now, I also want to bring up last year's race. I think that has a really good look in terms of how the Gen 6 raced and in terms of how the next gen races. All these races back here are at the tail end of the Gen 6 era, where these teams kind of understood what they were doing. They understand how this race is going to play out. They understood what they had in terms of what they had in terms of the car and everything. They had a ton of practice going into this. Okay, and this practice aspect is another reason why I think specifically for the Daytona 500, for the Xfinity Series race, for the truck race, like I want to keep on building lines leaning towards WreckFest because we have such limited practice now. We have such limited time for these drivers to get experience in the draft and experience in race type conditions. You know, you're very limited here. And so when we look back at last year's duel, the field spread out a ton. It was very much a when are you pitting, who are you pitting with, that plays the race out. Like if we have a wreck in the duel, at max it's gonna be like 3, 4, maybe 5 car incident. We're not gonna be taking out gigantic chunks of the field just by the way that this race spreads out. Okay, that's just how it goes. You know. I just lost my train of thought. I also recorded this earlier and it didn't save, so if I seem all over the place, that's why I've already talked 20 minutes about this stuff. When we look at this race in terms of why don't we want to focus on the back marker cars? Well, look, all these things are based off of Daytona 500 qualifying. If you're starting near the back of the field, outside of isolated incidents to where you have Kevin Harvick starting last in duel number 1 in 2016 due to I forgot if it was a mechanical issue, they changed something. Either way, he had to start dead last in the duel. Like, of course, we're going to play Kevin Harvick starting last. Of course, David Reagan makes a lot of sense in 2018, starting dead last because he's a good plate racer and everything like that. But, like, I'll use last year's race for an example. Let's take a look at duel number 2. The duels really do come down to, hey, let's play the good guys who can actually gain us some positions here. Like, why am I going to waste my time with Jacques Villeneuve? Why am I going to waste my time with Timmy Hill? Give me Stenhouse. Give me Chris Buescher, Kevin Harvick. Like, drivers who are going to go up there and race and have a good chance of making positions in a duel. That's another thing. The duel, in my opinion, your pool should be pretty small. We see a lot of green in terms of finishing positions here. And granted, like duel number 2, typically, for whatever reason, it's always leaned towards some of the guys starting closer to the field, holding their position. I don't know if it's necessarily like they just feel like they have nothing to lose more. They feel more confident after watching the first duel that they can go up there and run. The first duel is kind of always timid. You have the Daytona 500 pole sitter. Nobody wants to be the guy who wrecks him. Nobody wants to, he doesn't want to wreck himself, okay? We've had very few incidents to where the pole sitter will actually stay up there and race, and we're going back quite a few years. When Chase Elliott got the pole in 2017, he went up there, won this event. We never see that. When we're looking back, we very, very, very rarely see the Daytona 500 pole sitter go up there and actually race. That's why we have finishes of 6th, 14th, 16th, 8th, 20th, and 7th for the pole sitter. In terms of DFS, it's not going to work at all. He's not viable there. When we look back at how the points are scored, and you can go through here if you're a part of the Patreon, you can go through and you can find how the let me show you where. You can click here and you can see how the points are distributed between the drivers and how people score in terms of DFS, in terms of their actual points and stuff. And like, look, the duels, mainly just because it's like every other type of plate race, the pricing doesn't necessarily matter. It's very rare that you're going to go, that the top 6 scorers are going to go over $50,000. You really just need the top 6 scorers in general. The pricing doesn't matter, okay? And so, yeah, you're going to see Kyle Larson, last year, start first, finish 7th. I guess that's a good day for Larson, but he's 9th highest in terms of DFS points. That's not going to get you there. You have to necessarily try and build to land on at least 4, if not 5 of the top 6 scorers. That's how I approach it. Where are we seeing, 5 of the top 6 scorers in these races? Yes, you have, a good amount of it coming from like the 16th, 17th, 18th position here, but you're also seeing the major portion of this in terms of DFS scoring coming from right in the middle of the duel. Very rarely we're seeing any in the top 5. My type of builds typically start from like 6 and kind of work their way down to right around 18th and 19th, unless there's just like a clear and obvious place differential play in the back. We're focusing on the middle of where these guys are in terms of the duel. Duel number 2, kind of similar, a microcosm of how like the Xfinity series typically kind of bumps up the optimal position just slightly compared to the other series. For whatever reason, as I said, duel number 2, typically it's because these drivers have seen how the cars are performing, seeing how the track is performing. whether it's temperature, whether it's wind, whatever the case may be. We typically see a little bit more confidence in racing in duel number 2. So we typically do see some more of the optimal plays coming from around the 3rd, 4th, 5th position. But for the most part, they're still middle of the pack, or middle of middle of the drivers, middle of the starting grid of the duel. So in terms of building lines, in terms of focusing on where I want to focus on people, I usually X out the pole sitters because I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to mess around with that, and we have seen that be a pretty good strategy. Let's just not waste time with the pole sitter. Okay, past that, let's start focusing on guys who are most likely going to go up there and win and stuff. Like Daniel Hemrick, running that car for Colleague, yeah, sure. Right here we can be like, yeah, of course Hemrick is going to finish in the back half of the field, but when we're looking at these, we should understand that Suarez, Hemrick, Chastain, they're most likely not going to finish there. Okay, this isn't like crapping on drivers or talking shit about drivers and stuff, but in terms of where the grid is set for these duels, it's based on you trying to get the pole for the Daytona 500. Okay, so you're putting everything into that. Okay, once you get in a race situation and you don't get the pole, you qualify fast but you don't get the pole, of course you're going to make changes to that car that is going to have you just not finish where you're starting. Okay, unless you're like a Toyota driver, unless you're like Stewart Haas when they were killing the plate races, unless you're like a Hendrick car. But even the Hendrick cars lately, they build it for the 500, and if they get the pole and stuff, they're just going to ride. We don't see the Hendrick guys really go out there and just race stupid aggressive in the duels anymore, because they're either built to get the pole, or they're focusing on and realizing that, hey, this duel really doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter where you start. Let's focus on the 500. Let's get a car. Let's understand what we can take to the 500 and set the car for that. Why are we wasting time with the duel and everything? Okay, so at least for me, that's how I like to approach it. I'm so sorry. I'm so pissed I recorded this earlier and didn't save, because then I feel like I've repeated everything 7 times. Let's take a look real fast at how I build lineups for the duels. Okay, so this is last year's duel number 1. Yet again, so in terms of how small the contests are and how small the player field or the player pool is, in the grand scheme of things, when we're looking at how people score DFS wise, we are seeing a very small pool. That's just how it is, I don't really want to waste my time playing a bunch of nobodies, playing a bunch of guys racing to get into the race, because they're not trying to win the duel. They're not trying to finish top 5. They're trying to beat the other guy. They're trying to, between the go-or-go homers, they're just trying to beat one another, Also, secondly, I remember now, before we look at the lineups I did last year, this race will most likely go green, okay? Now, I did mention in this one that we're seeing less and less practice for these drivers at these racetracks. However, we're also seeing, because look, this is lined up by how fast you are in terms of qualifying for the 500. If you're in the back of the field, you're slow. In the grand scheme of things, you're just a slow car. Okay, so the fact that these guys are going to show up to Daytona, run a queue time with no practice entering the duel, of course we're going to see the field spread out. That's just how it's going to be. Typically, we get a little bit of practice before the duels just to get an idea. These guys are going to go off the trailer and race. We're going to have some slight misses in terms of setups, in terms of how these cars act in dirty air and stuff. We're going to see a separation. And then you go into pit lane, as I said, the variables that dictate who you pit with and how you pit with in these races are manufacturer and team, and so we're going to see, as we saw last year, and I think we're going to see it more this year, we're going to see it continuing on. And I mean, when we look in the past, we see, more of a pack stay together. But with this car, it is very dependent on having guys to push you and work with you and sticking with your team and everything. And so, look, we're going to have little bubbles of 5, 4, 6 cars, running together in a small group. When you look back at the finishes of both duels last year, the leaders are in a little bubble of 4, 5, 6 cars, We're having guys go lap down. We're having drivers go laps down. We're having teams go lap down. Specifically when you don't have anything to race for, why? It doesn't matter if you finish a lap down or not. It doesn't matter. So, last year's race, when we look at duel number 2, we have Joseph Logano, who's staying up front, who's leading a good majority of the race, who throws a dumb block on Chris Buescher, leaving turn 2, coming to the checkered flag, and he ends up getting wrecked. Where does Logano finish? Logano finishes 9th. Logano goes from first. He wrecks himself. He's the only car involved. He finishes 9th, and he's still the 11th highest scoring driver. Why is that? Oh, it's because everybody else was a lap down. From 12th on back, they were on lap 59. You know, even in duel number 2 or even in duel number 1, I think it was 15 or 16 guys on the lead lap where 17 on back was a lap down. Like, we're having several teams go laps down. We're having several things in the race be dictated by how you pit and just how the race is going to play out. And so if we're having guys go laps down, we're not including, the first 2 like starters generally. We're not including the back markers, starting at the tail end of the duel, unless they're like I hate using the word free square, but unless they're like a clear and obvious driver in a team that you play. Like, the pool is very small for the duels. It is very, very small. So for me, I don't play a ton of lineups for the duels. Yeah, sure, I play some and stuff, and I'll enter them all in all the contests, the main ones, the smaller ones and stuff, but I'm not going to go crazy playing every driver here in a situation like, what if this guy wins? Like, well, I pinpoint an area and pools that I want to play with, and that's it. That's how I go about it. So let's go ahead and look at we'll do duel number 1 last year, and so this is what I do. For me personally, you might be like, 3 lineups? What are you, a loser? Well, look, man, when I'm throwing like, for the 500 weekend in general, when I'm throwing like $1,300 at NASCAR DFS and that week in general, like, all the money is going to the Truck, Xfinity, and the Daytona 500. We're using very little for the duels and stuff. But you can see the pool that I'm working with. Curious about Kaz Grala in case he did anything, but for the most part, we're playing guys who are going to go up there and race. Okay? Duel number 2, more specifically, was more aggressive with, a little slightly bigger pool, but it's still a situation where we can kind of pinpoint the guys who are going to be racing. I don't want to waste time with guys down here. I don't want to waste time with the guys up here. I want to focus on the people who are going to be racing and stuff. I want to focus on people who are going to be up there. Like, that's just how I approach the duels and everything. And you can see I haven't even edited this since February 17th of last year. But that's how I want to go about it, It's the dual races. Let's not overcomplicate it and stuff. So, like, yeah, sure, we want to play. We want to play. That's why some people get mad whenever I say, we'll just play the good drivers, because they're like, Brandon, who are the good drivers? Like, look, seriously, like, look at the teams, look at the names around where these guys are starting. If we have, I want Travis Pastrana to make the race, okay? But if Travis Pastrana is starting 16th in his duel, I don't really want to touch him. I don't see him moving on up. I think that was the last thing that I haven't mentioned in this one that I mentioned in the other one. Like, when you look at duel number 1 last year, like Chastain, Suarez, Hemrick, 10th, 11th, 17th, like, yeah, we're not throwing shade at these drivers, but we can realistically see that these guys are going to kind of lose positions. When we look back at previous years, like, are these finishes, like, really surprising? I don't think they are. Like, yeah, Stewart Haas was killer around this time. Of course, we're going to have Eric Almirola run up there and run forward. Of course, we're going to have, Bell and actually Eric Almirola. Eric Almirola is going to run up front in his dual races, Like, Hamlin is going to do his best to get up there. I think Hamlin, I forgot what happened with Hamlin this year. Speeding, something happened. For the most part, Hamlin wants to be up there. He wants to try and, start up front for the Daytona 500. Like, we can honestly go through these drivers and have an idea of how they're going to do in the race and how they want to approach it and stuff like that. Like, that's not insane. It's not crazy. It's not rocket science, Anyway, you want to support me, support Pearce, support the work that we do, support the time and effort that goes into making stuff like this. Like, I understand somebody from another site's going to just copy and paste this stuff or, like, have an idea of what they want to do. But, like, look, making this stuff and having it be in a presentable fashion, that takes a lot of hard work, man. We put a ton of time into our sheets and stuff. Like, we're not just throwing the stuff together. We're not just mailing it in. We put a lot of time and effort to make it look pretty, to make it look like you can actually, like, look through it and understand what's going on and understand what's being said to you and everything like that. So anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to me. And, I will talk to you guys in the next video. I'll see you then.